If there's anyone there, let's see. Hangout area is live. I can see it. I'm going to take my glasses off so I can see a little bit better. I'm also going to open up the chat function so people can let me know if they can hear me. Type in 1 if you're present and you can hear me okay. Welcome everyone, we're about to get started. I just wanted to make sure that this is up and running. I'm going to say hi first as a way to get the conversation started. So if you're out there and you're listening, welcome, my name's Juan. I just wanted you to type in 1 just to let me know that you can hear my voice okay, that we're up and running technically and that everything's working. I wonder if there's a way to be sure of that. Okay, I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and get started since we're a few minutes into it. So my program director is going to help out with any technical support. You can let me know that it's working well. I wanted to first welcome everyone on this wintry Wednesday to my webinar called So You Say You Want a Resolution, How to Turn Resolutions into Permanent Change. I'm going to start my presentation so that you can see the different concepts that we're going to talk about today. This is the title. You say you want a resolution, how to change New Year's resolutions into permanent change. And I'm coming to you today from My Therapy NYC. We're a mental health group program serving New York City, providing individual, couples, and group therapy. And we're also doing workshops, wellness tips, blogs, and as you now see, webinars. I'm also going to put up some information at the end of the presentation on our website so you can check out more services from us. Just to let you know, my name's Juan Olmedo, and I'm a clinical social worker and therapist. As I mentioned, I'm part of My Therapy NYC, and I'm also in private practice. I've been really fortunate in my career to have a lot of exposure working with New Yorkers of all types and dealing with all kinds of issues, to get experience working with folks with from the LGBT community, dealing with substance use issues, HIV prevention and living with HIV, relationship and intimacy concerns, and mood issues, including depression and anxiety, for many, many years. And one of the things that I've done most is work with folks around making important changes in their lives. So that led me to want to do this webinar today on why there's such a challenge in turning New Year's resolutions, a common occurrence and kind of a ritual for many of us, into more lasting change. Why is it so easy to make a resolution and so hard to see it out? So I want to talk a little bit about the goals for the webinar this afternoon. I'm going to identify 3 common barriers to sticking with resolutions. Why are they hard to follow through on? I'm going to talk at length about the stages of change model, a model that I work with my clients around how people make changes and how they make them successful. And finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about what works to build motivation and what doesn't, how to choose goals that work for you, and making plans for change that you can follow through with. So a little bit of background. As I mentioned, New Year's resolutions, they're a pretty common occurrence. Every time January comes around, somebody probably asks you, so what are your New Year's resolutions? And some studies, in fact, several research studies that I came across, found that about 50% of Americans make resolutions every year. If you think about it, that's often more people than people who vote in local or general or even federal elections. So that's a lot of folks, and yet as high as 90% of people who make resolutions wind up not being able to see them through even to the end of the month. One psychologist, John Norcross, found that after 6 months, about 40% of a group of people he was studying were able to stay with it. 2 years later, following that same group, only 19 were still involved in the change that they had resolved around. So again, easy to make, popular sort of ritual for New Year, new me, and yet so difficult to follow through. So I want to talk about why it's hard to kind of stay with them. One broad challenge that people encounter is that their goals are just not defined. They're too broad. Sometimes we're overambitious, or choose unrealistic goals that are kind of out of sync with how we see ourselves. So one common area that people like to make changes in is around losing weight or improving health. And yet the phrase "go big or go hard," go hard or go home comes to mind, where we would rather go with a huge goal like joining a CrossFit center, instead of starting with something like working out for half an hour a week, right? We feel like if it's too small, it's not worth it, and yet it winds up being something that's too unrealistic and too difficult to stay with. Motivation is a huge part of what makes resolutions difficult to stay with. Often we're motivated by things like fear or guilt. Fear of an issue getting worse. Let's say if I'm looking to lose weight, my fears might go to having health problems, or feeling more unattractive, or that I feel guilty that I'm not in as good a shape as before. And we think of motivation sometimes as this fixed entity where you either have it or you don't. And if you don't, then that's another thing to feel guilty about. The truth can be more subtle in terms of motivation being a quantity that comes and goes, that grows and wanes. And we're going to talk later on about how to identify it, how to build it, and how to reconnect to it when need be. Planning is probably one of the third and one of the most important aspects of the difficulty with being successful with resolutions. We often go to a spontaneity, right? We think, all right, I'm going to get in shape, so it means I'm going to go to the gym X number of times, and I'm going to eat better, and I'm going to cook at home. So it becomes very spontaneous and disorganized. There's no specific plan. There's no itemized actions that I can actually put into place or that I can prioritize. Another thing that we often forget in our plans is that we try to avoid going public with the change. We don't let other people know. Often that's because we don't want to feel that sense of frustration or guilt or shame if the change doesn't work out. So we keep it to ourselves, but then we also lose a real needed sense of reinforcement from our social supports. I'm going to add one other point in terms of the resolution and where it fits along the process of change. Because I'm going to talk today about how change is a process rather than a set of behaviors that goes from A to B to C. For some people, the resolution is the motivation in and of itself, right? Okay, I want to lose 50 pounds. That would be one person's goal. And we think that it as a starting point. Other people might do more in-depth self-analysis, think about what kinds of issues are going on and what they want to work on first, and go to weight loss as it relates to other health issues and appearance and self-image. And so it's more the end of a process of contemplation. I think a resolution as motivation can happen throughout the process of change. So without further ado, I want to move a little bit into the stages of change model to begin to talk about what that is and how it applies to growth and change. Stages of change models developed by a team of psychologists led by two well-known psychologists called Prochaska and DiClemente. They wanted to know why people change successfully on their own, right? So they worked with thousands of people who were making one of the most difficult changes that we can think of today. They were trying to stop smoking, and they were trying to do it without the assistance of a formal kind of support, no programs, no therapy, etc. It was all very, very self-motivating. So they wanted to know, how do people get motivated, and how do they implement change, and how are they successful with it? So they came up with the stages of change model, which is radical in a number of ways. One is that, unlike, again, a linear model that says you start at point A and you end at point Z, they found that people go through stages, and they're predictable stages over and over until they get to a more permanent and lasting change. And when I say over and over, another aspect that was pretty revolutionary about their thinking was, it doesn't just take one go around for most people. Some people are very successful, they just stop cold turkey. Most people felt that they found that they had to try to make the change several times before they got it right. And third, they built in the reality. They recognized as part of this process that people often return to the problem behavior. So a person might cut back or stop smoking for a period and then pick it up again. But rather than having that be an out-and-out failure, it was actually part of the next cycle. If you can learn from it, instead of experiencing guilt or shame, then you can actually implement it into making a more lasting change. So I want to talk a little bit about the different stages now in particular. Another really important piece that they found, pre-contemplation as a stage. So they mean before there's even an awareness that there's an issue, right? There's no intention to change, there's no motivation. This was actually the beginning of the process, because what often happens is, even though there's no specific awareness on the part of the individual and no intention to change, other people bring it to their attention, and that begins to impact the awareness and raise the consciousness around the behavior as a problem. Once the person was more aware of it and start to see it as an issue, they move into the contemplation stage. This is the stage where people are aware that the problem exists, and they're seriously thinking about how to deal with it, but there's not the sense of a motivation yet, or a commitment, I should say, to take action. So in contemplation, you are looking a lot at motivation, but you're looking at a kind of dual motivation. What's my motivation to change the behavior, and what's my motivation to stay the same with it? And that there's a kind of weighing back and forth. If you think of like scales, like the scales of justice, you're constantly weighing the pros and the cons in order to build the motivation and have the pros of change outweigh the cons of staying the same. As you move away from contemplation, then you move into preparation. Preparation is the stage where you have both intention and you start to do some change in behavior. So a person who's in preparation might have a stronger intent to take action within the next month or so. And it involves a lot of planning, which we mentioned before, and we're going to talk about again. Planning in order to identify what are my specific goals, as well as what are some of the barriers to those goals, and how do I kind of compensate for perceived barriers? How do I build into my plan a way to work with the things that'll get in the way so that I can be successful? Finally, or I should say next, we have the stage that most of us are most content and comfortable with, the action stage. The person's in it now. They're taking the steps to make the change. They're cutting back on their smoking, or they're increasing their exercise. You know, we're a very action-oriented society, and we like this one the best. And we often think that this is where we should go first. But again, the model of the stages of change indicates that this one, the action stage, comes after other processes. And although it's an important one in terms of ultimately having a successful change, it's hard to skip the other ones and not to be aware and also think of what will support you during the action stage. How do you put your plan into action and then find how to reinforce it? Once you're able to have a successful behavior change for 6 months, again, this is what Prochaska and DiClemente found, it really increased your chance of turning it into a permanent change. And so you move into the maintenance stage. Once you're in maintenance, you would continue to get the social support that you need. You focus on any problem solving, tinkering with the plan that you created, so that if you find yourself going back to the behavior, that it's not a signal for failure and it's not a signal to stop. In reality, it means that you will probably cycle through the stages again, but this time trying to do it differently, trying to modify your plan, trying to increase your support, trying to do it slightly differently so that you can be more successful and build on the successes that you've already had. Relapse is part of the process according to Prochaska and DiClemente, but I chose for the presentation to kind of identify it, but not use it in the model specifically. So this is the stage, this is the model that I tend to work with, and that I like to look at resolutions through this particular lens. So a huge question that comes up around making changes is, what is motivation, right? Where do I find it? How do I build it? What happens if I don't feel it? Since lack of motivation is a big barrier to being successful. I want to go to another set of clinicians whose work has heavily influenced me, Miller and Rolnick, who came up with the idea of motivational interviewing. And their definition of motivation is that it can be defined as the probability that a person will enter into, continue, and adhere to a specific change strategy. Again, as it connects to the stages of change model, because they're highly related to each other, it really sees motivation as a different kind of entity where there's more fluidity. It recognizes that motivation grows and it also wanes. Sometimes we're not as connected to our motivation, but that you can do things to reconnect and to find ways to be internally and externally motivated. But it's again radical in the sense that it doesn't mean if your motivation is low, you're not lacking, you're not deficient. It just means that you want to think of ways to reconnect to it in a way that can help you keep moving. So motivation, building on achievement. Often we don't recognize the steps that we've taken that are positive and that are leading us to our goal. So it really is important when people are successful with changes to build on what you've already succeeded. As the saying goes, nothing succeeds like success. Another thing that research found in terms of helping with keeping change going successfully is to really find a way to keep track of your progress. So how do you do that? How do you recognize for yourself that you've taken steps, that you've been going to the gym more consistently, that you've been making more meals at home, or that you're losing weight, even if it's incrementally? How do you keep track of that? You can use a journal, you can use a log, you can use a graph even, but it's really, really important to be able to keep track of it in a way that is visual and that you can kind of gain some sense of inspiration from. Although change tends to be forward focused, right? We want to think about the end result, being in better shape, being healthier, being in a relationship. It's just as important in motivation to stay focused on the present. And what I mean by that is to really stay connected to your own sense of your emotions, your thought processes, where you're at as far as how you're feeling and perceiving your own sense of growth. Focusing too much on the present can take away from, again, if you're feeling a sense of a lack or needing a boost of support. So how do you keep some awareness of what you're feeling in the moment, and how do you build on that to be able to keep the motivation going? Kind of related to the progress point, create a reward system that works for you, that again can measure your progress. It's really important to have a sense to validate when you're making progress, and that you're staying with your plan, and that you're having good feelings about the change that you're engaged in. You also want to really be realistic with the reward itself, so that it doesn't have a sense of undermining or undercutting the progress that you're trying to make. By this, I mean something like if I'm working on dieting and losing weight, you don't want to create a reward system where you treat yourself with a rich food necessarily. Or if you do, how do you do it in a way that's very moderated so that you can feel the sense of indulgence and enjoyment without it being guilt-laden or like you're sliding back, right? So build it in a way that you approve of and that is part of your forward growth. Goals are really, really important as far as the planning stage. Setting specific goals that can even be smaller and incremental, concrete ones that you can do can help, again, with a sense of incremental success. And also, what's my time frame? How realistic is it for me to lose X number of pounds? Do I give myself a month? Do I give myself 6 months? Do I allow myself a full year and check in throughout? Don't make it a time frame that's too restrictive that might set you up for frustration or failure. Often, one of the obstacles to setting goals is that we set goals that are beyond what we're able to do in the moment. So checking in and taking inventory around what's your capacity is really important. It might sound obvious, but if my goal is to lose weight or to increase exercise, am I part of a gym membership? Do I have a gym membership yet? Am I going to go to a gym that is accessible to me? Is it something that I can afford where if it starts to get too expensive, that'll be one of the things I cut out of my budget? So aside from the actionable steps of how many times I'll go and what I want to focus on, you really want to think about what's your capacity to put it into place in a way that's going to increase your chance for success. And I think finally, it's important to make room to set goals both around behaviors, like eating better, cooking more at home, going to the gym more often, increasing my daily activity, as well as what are some attitudes and thought patterns that I might want to look at and make changes around. If I take into account my mindset around the specific behavior, so how does being overweight or being unhappy with my current weight impact my sense of my self-esteem or my self-image? My own view of myself is something that I would want to look at in terms of also changing incrementally, recognizing again when I'm taking steps in a direction towards making change that I want to validate, so that I increase my own sense of self-awareness and self-image that is in sync with the behaviors that I'm also trying to do for that. And finally, planning, the planning stage, which again from the model can be both in preparation as well as action. Getting support is so crucial because often when people were trying to make changes on their own or when they were trying to sort of do them incognito, they weren't able to share their successes as well as they were trying to hide failure. Getting support, being public about it, and identifying the people that are important to you who have your back, who can provide you either with support, with feedback, or just a sounding board when you need it. In fact, there was a concept in one research study of an accountability buddy, some friend, partner, lover, family member, coworker, somebody that you felt in particular because of your relationship and your history together could be there for you in the way that would be helpful for you. Do you want support? Do you want encouragement? Do you want tough love? How do you choose what is going to be most helpful when you feel motivation is flagging, or to reinforce when you're on a wave of success? And who can do that for you? Identify barriers. I joke with some of my clients in terms of kind of working to make changes around weight and diet, that one of the main obstacles that I experienced on my way to work was that I would pass a crumbs every day. And although the number of crumbs in the city is much lower now, I literally had to make the choice to, at least sometimes during the week, take a different route, because passing by the store and its bright colors and the shiny, shiny sprinkles and the luscious, delicious chocolate, all that stuff was just, too much of a temptation and a reminder of how yummy and tasty it would be when I was really trying to cut back. So knowing what the barriers are in order to start taking steps to compensate for them, or changing small steps so that you can overcome those and take them into account. Finally, really give yourself permission to make mistakes. The stages of change model really looks at change as a process of growth. And if it takes, at least on the average, I think it was 5 to 6 times through the stages before the person was successful in a long-term change of stopping smoking. You have to be able to make mistakes along the way. You have to recognize it. It's important to acknowledge it and give yourself permission to do it in a way that reminds yourself, this is part of how I'm learning, right? So if passing the crumbs is part of the mistake that I made that I didn't account for, well, now I know it's too convenient. So maybe I'll think about taking a different route. Maybe I'll think about not having loose cash on certain days when I pass by. But how do you really, have a sense of compassion for yourself to know that mistakes are part of what you're going to be learning from, as well as the successes? One tool that I find, I'm going to wrap up with, that's really, really helpful in terms of motivation, is a cost-benefit analysis sheet. All right. So basically, you can do this with a piece of paper. You can do this where you just simply divide up a sheet into 4 quadrants. Right. And what you want to do, this is again like the weighing of the scales, to say, what are the pros and cons of changing, and what are the pros and cons of staying the same? And this is very helpful in the contemplation stage, and this is extremely helpful in the planning stage. But even when you're in your action, it's something helpful to revisit. So when you start, fill out the top segments as fully as you can. What are the costs of staying the same? What are the costs of not making a change? What are the benefits of doing that? We want to ignore what we like about the behavior that we're looking to change. So if I'm looking to lose weight, it might be that part of it is that I enjoy eating, or I enjoy eating rich foods, or I enjoy overindulging in foods, so what's the benefit? What do I like about that? Whether it's a sense of comfort food, whether it's a sense of it's a way to relieve stress, whether it's a sense of, this is what I do with my friends after work. We go out for drinks, or we go out for dinner at rich food places. Fill them out as much as you can. And then for the lower segment, complete the quadrants for the costs of making a change and the benefits of making a change. So the benefits of making the change, we like to go to automatically. We think, well, of course, I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to look sexy. Everyone's going to want me. I'm going to feel better about myself. I'm going to save money. I'm going to live, much longer. That can come pouring out of you. And those are great things that can be motivational. But be honest with the other side too. What are the costs of making this change? Well, if I don't eat as much, then I might have more stress during the day, or I don't get to take breaks from my job, or I don't see my friends as much, or if I do see my friends, I'm the one having the salad when they're having the spare ribs. To be really, really honest with both sides of it, thinking about the sense of the ambivalence that comes with making changes. If you fill this out when you're in a moment of needing inspiration and motivation, you'll start to notice some similarities where the costs of the change and the benefits of staying the same parallel each other, and the costs of staying the same and the benefits of making a change also parallel. But again, it's important to get the conversation out of your head, and sometimes just seeing it on a piece of paper, on a flip chart, on your computer, can really make a difference in terms of having an objective view of it. So that's my presentation for today. I wanted to see if there's any questions, any thoughts about any of the concepts that in terms of how they apply. Let me see. I see I have, okay. So when it comes to making a change around relationships, this is something that comes up with folks that I work with. Often it's about how to identify what kind of change to make when there's a specific dynamic in a relationship that I'm not happy with, whether it's communication, whether I feel like I'm unfulfilled or not getting my needs met, picking the quote unquote wrong person. And it goes back to really trying to contemplate and think about what are the dynamics of the relationships that I see myself getting into, what's familiar about it, what's uncomfortable with it, and what particular aspect do I want to change? Because if I make a change in the relationship, if I go with someone that I can communicate with better, if I seek to get involved with people who treat me more with how I think I should be treated, how is that going to impact my own view of myself? Because I might be so used to being responded to and treated in a certain way that changing it affects that. It changes my sense of self-view. Another question that just came up: do you recommend having one resolution to concentrate on versus several resolutions? One that's specifically manageable and concrete is really, really important. If you have more than one, or if you have several that you're going to at the same time, it can split your focus. It can make it difficult to stay motivated. I think it also might speak to whether or not your awareness of what kind of change is important right now is really there. Give yourself time to contemplate, how do these changes connect to each other that I'm trying to think of, and where do I want to prioritize, right? What would be the first thing that I want to focus on? Another question that comes up is, if other people experience a struggle becoming stuck in the contemplation stage, how do you avoid obsessing over weighing the pros and cons and staying in this stage for too long? Great question. That's a really difficult place to be sometimes, when you're in a contemplative mode and you're kind of going back and forth and you're ambivalent. How do you avoid obsessing over the pros and cons? How do you avoid saying that? The truth of it is that often, if you're still in that stage, it's because there's more to weigh out. The pros and the cons, whether they're equally weighing on you, how do you begin to tip the cons in your favor? It's not something that can necessarily have a time frame on it. Sometimes you do need to stay with it. It's also really, really important to have a conversation with someone else about it, because a lot of times the obsessive part it happens from staying in your own head, and sometimes having some sense of objectivity, whether with friends, whether with a family member, somebody that's gone through a similar change, can be really, really important. But really, part of it is just the reality that even when you're in the action stage, often you can, you're still having some sense of contemplation or ambivalence about it. So I'm going to go ahead and switch it back to me so that people can know who's been talking. Anything else come up? Again, please make sure to check out our website at www.mytherapynyc.com. We're having workshops and another webinar coming up next month. Feel free to type in any other questions or thoughts that you have. This chat is going to be available on YouTube if you want to check it out again or share with a friend. Thank you so much for being part of it, and be well and have a great 2015.